Today we'll be talking about sentence final particles. I'm going to be looking at one sentence final particle in particular, and that is the sentence final particle a. This is a particle that appears in all dialects of Chinese, and it appears also in English. This is an example of how the particle can be used in Mandarin Chinese.
我知道啊，这笨蛋，死蠢蛋，王八蛋，到底知不知道我喜欢你啊？我每天都来找你，你以为我时间够？
And this here is an example of the particle used in English.
Stop. Ew. No.
So what I'm going to do is first go over the literature on the particle a in Mandarin Chinese, try to tease out its different meanings, and then look at its analogs in English and how the English sentence final particle a may have developed, and then comparing the two, come to a conclusion about what a actually means. Before we dive in though, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Now, a is a sentence final particle, of which Mandarin Chinese has many others. For example, learners of Chinese will know ma is a sentence final question particle, and ba is a sentence final suggestive particle. Now, of these different sentence final particles, we know that a is among the most commonly used. It is also acquired at a very young age, and yet it's not used as much by learners of Chinese as a second language. My kids started using a at home from around age 2 before they had hardly any vocabulary. And yet the students I teach in my Chinese classes don't ever use a, even when they get into their 3rd or 4th year. So it's reasonable to ask, why is there such a discrepancy? And the answer, I believe, can be traced partly to the fact that an analog equivalent in English has never been clearly pointed out, which is what we're going to be doing today. But first, there are different types of a, and we're not going to be looking at all of them today. Wen-chao, for example, in his 1965 Grammar of Spoken Chinese, listed as many as 11 different types of sentence final a. In his description, a can be used to start a question, to seek confirmation, to express exclamation or impatience, and a number of other different functions. The Chinese linguist Lu Shuxiang, in his 1980 work on the Chinese lexicon, reduced the categories to 4, that is, descriptive a, imperative a, interrogative a, and exclamatory a. Zhang Lingying, in a 2009 article, further reduced the categories to just 2 types. The first being an expression of concern or degree of certainty, and the second used for interrogation. In our video, we're only going to be looking at the first type, that is, an expression of concern or degree of certainty. We won't be looking at a as a question particle. So then, what does a actually mean? Well, first it is necessary to point out that in addition to serving as a sentence final particle, a can also be used as a standalone interjection. For example, in the sentence, 着火了. Okay, that a is more like a scream, an exclamation. We won't be looking at this type of a. We're only looking at the type of a that occurs at the end of a sentence as a particle, such as in 着火了啊. When you look up the meaning of the sentence final a, you will often see a list of disparate functions. The Total Learner's Chinese English Dictionary, for example, says that a is attached to a sentence to express strong emotion, such as surprise, admiration, regret, etc. You find the same in Chinese grammars. Yip and Remington's Chinese A Comprehensive Grammar describe it as a direct and instinctive exclamation. In Huang and Shi's 2016 A Reference Grammar of Chinese, it is said that a represents the speaker's surprise or astonishment. In Ross and Sheng Ma's Modern Mandarin Grammar, a is said to represent obviousness or impatience. So a lot of different functions crammed into one. And you find the same in Chinese language textbooks. In Integrated Chinese, for example, a is described as a sentence final particle of exclamation. In Practical Audiovisual Chinese, it is a phrase final particle indicating affirmation, exclamation, etc. The textbook Chinese Odyssey says, this is used at the end of a sentence for emphasis. You don't really get any more nuanced explanations until you start looking at the scholarly literature. One very helpful work is Chauncey Chu's A Discourse Grammar of Mandarin Chinese, where a is described as a particle of personal involvement. Now, Chu further breaks down personal involvement into 2 distinct parts, that is, speaker concern, showing that this issue matters to you, and degree of certainty. That is, how attached or how certain you are to this statement that you're making. A description of that captures the essence of the particle even better is that of Regina Wu, who believes that is used to mark a discrepancy in knowledge, expectation, or perspective regarding some state of affairs between the current speaker and the previous speaker. That is to say, when two people are talking, if I say something and I believe that you may think differently, you may have a different view of this state of affairs, then I add an to the end of my statement. A similar description is given in Wen-yin Liu's PhD thesis, where she says, the use of the particle reflects the speaker's belief that the addressee's attitude towards the state of affairs denoted by the propositional content of the sentence preceding the particle differs from the speaker's attitude. That is to say, again, if you imagine two people talking and I utter a sentence, but I believe that the listener, the person I'm speaking with, has a different view of this issue than expressed in my sentence, then that is when I add an to the end of a sentence. So indicates a difference in attitude towards the topic between the speaker and the addressee. Let's look at some examples. First, some neutral statements. 你会不会开车? Do you know how to drive? 会. Yes, I do. Okay. Nothing is implied there. Whereas when I add an to it, 你会不会开车啊? Do you have any idea how to drive? 会呀. Of course I do. Okay. When the sentence final particle is added, it implies that you think you know how to drive, whereas I think you don't. We have a difference in attitude regarding this issue. 你会不会开车啊? Do you have any idea how to drive? And when the other party answers, 会呀, of course I do. What that implies is, you may believe I don't know how to drive, but I think I drive very well. Okay, that is where the difference in attitude lies. And it is the sentence final particle that points out this difference. Now here it is important to point out that showing a difference in attitude is different from disagreeing with the other party. So let's look at this next example here. 要不要出去吃点东西? 好. You want to go out and eat something? Sure. Okay, that's a neutral sentence. Whereas when we have the 要不要出去吃点东西? 好啊. Now when the addressee says 好啊, they are agreeing to the proposition, and yet the here indicates that the degree of agreement or the level of excitement exceeds that is expected by the speaker. Okay, not only am I saying yes, I am saying yes in an enthusiastic way, with much more enthusiasm than you would have expected. Okay, so there we have the Which is why Wen-yin Liu goes on to say that describing as denoting an attitude difference between the speaker and the addressee predicts that the speaker may sound surprised, incredulous, impatient, or sarcastic. It also predicts that the particle can be used to soften the voice or make the speech emphatic. So this is a range of very different functions, but what unites them is that they indicate an attitude difference, a difference of attitude between the speaker and the addressee. And it is this explanation of that we will be adopting in this video. Are there any particles that serve a function similar to Mandarin in the English language? Of course there are. The example that immediately comes to mind is the sentence final particle man. Now, in an article interestingly titled What Man Does by Ellen McCready, the author describes man as indicating that the speaker expects the hearer to doubt the claim she makes by the utterance. Let me give you some examples. John came to the party versus John came to the party, man. Now, in the second sentence, John came to the party, man, what that man does is it shows that the listener, you, told me or believed that John was not coming to the party, whereas John did indeed come to the party. So the state of affairs contradicts your belief. There's a discrepancy here. There's a difference between what I said and what you believed. Okay, this man, at the end of the sentence, John came to the party, man, highlights this difference. You can also use man in interrogative sentences. Go buy some sandwiches. Go buy some sandwiches, man. Okay, when I add the man at the end of it, go buy some sandwiches, man, what I'm implying is you were probably just sitting around, unwilling to do anything, unwilling to go buy a sandwich, and I don't want you to do that. I want you to go out and get that sandwich. So go buy some sandwiches, man. This man indicates a difference between what you're inclined to do and what I want you to do. There again is the difference in attitude. You can also get man in questions. Where did you go? Where did you go, man? When I add that man, what I'm implying is you should have stayed here. You shouldn't have gone anywhere. And yet you went. So, where did you go, man? What that means is you went somewhere when I wasn't expecting you to go anywhere. There, again, is that difference in attitude. So man, according to McGreedy, indicates that the speaker expects the hearer to doubt the claim made by the utterance. There is a difference in attitude between the speaker and the listener. Now, man is not the only particle in English that can serve this purpose. In another article titled Anything Man Can Do, Dude Can Do, by Paris Gapmeyer, it is pointed out that in addition to man, you can also use particles like dude, girl, bro. John came to the party, dude. John came to the party, girl. John came to the party, bro. All of these serve the same function. Now let's look at a new sentence final attitudinal particle in English, and that is the particle a. Interestingly, it has the same form as the Mandarin sentence final particle a. Now, the presence of this sentence final particle in English was pointed out by the linguist John McWhorter in a 2018 podcast titled No. McWhorter noticed that in movies before the mid-aughts, was never used, whereas after the mid-aughts, is often used to indicate emotion or excitement. Let's look at this clip from Modern Family where when Luke asks his sister to move, the sister Haley says, "You have room." Okay. But to add emphasis, she says, "You have room." Okay, that appears after the room. Let's look at this.
Here's that napkin you wanted.
I got the mail.
Would it have killed you to give me one without ketchup on it?
Move.
You have room.
No, move out. You're 40.
And you see the same kind of usage in the 2006 TV movie, Totally Awesome, where when Dominic Swain wants to emphasize that dancing is important to her, she says, "Dancing is my life," but with an at the end for emphasis. Dancing is my life, Listen.
But dancing is my life. Dancing is my life!
Now, what does this do? According to McWhorter, it is an exclamatory particle. It is used in contexts of joy or surprise or dramatic announcement or even frustration. Another commentator, Adam Alexis, also calls it an exclamatory particle, but he explains that it can also be a playful usage and that it is used in contexts like joy, surprise, or drama. There is also the question of who uses a. McWhorter and Alexis both attribute the usage to young Caucasian women. McWhorter even goes so far as to call it a white girl dialect. On Reddit discussion boards, however, users have mentioned that it is used often by Gen Alpha, and some have written that it is used not only in the United States, but also in the United Kingdom and Australia. Now, when comparing in English and in Mandarin, it is important to point out that although the two are spelled differently, in English is usually spelled UH or UGH, whereas in Mandarin is spelled A or AH, it is essentially the same sound, okay? Whether you spell it AH or UGH, it is fundamentally a neutral vowel, a schwa vowel. This is made clear from a post by a Reddit user who writes, "My name is Noah. Whenever somebody says no and adds an on the end, it sounds like my name." Okay, so here what it tells you is that that is like the in Noah, which is a schwa. The Chinese version of the particle has also been described as phonetically close to schwa. So you can see that these two attitudinal particles have essentially the same phonetic form. Reddit posts also point out a generational divide in the use of It is used a lot by younger speakers, and less so, or even misunderstood, by speakers of older generations. For example, my dad would remind me he didn't know who Noah was when I was whining and saying, "Noah." There you go. So then, where did the English particle come from? There are two possible explanations. It could have come about naturally. That is to say, we could view it as a linguistic universal. it could be due to universal phonetic constraints. That's one possible explanation. Another explanation is that it could have come from another language. That is to say, it is the result of language contact, most likely contact between Chinese and English. Let's look at both of these possibilities. The first possibility is that came about naturally. It is a linguistic universal. How is a linguistic universal? Well, let's look at how is pronounced in terms of articulation. When you have the mouth is open wide. We are permitting air to flow without obstruction, which allows for sonority, that is, vibration of the vocal cords. What that does is it allows for the projection of sonority after all words have ceased. I am done with my sentence. All my words have ended, but there is still more emotion that I want to express. So the airflow continues, the vocal folds continue to vibrate, and sound continues to be projected forward. When we do that, you can see it as a form of imitative sound symbolism. That is, I have so much within me that I want to express, and I express it through the flow of air, through the projection of sonority, even though all the words that I wanted to say have ended. That is the reason why this projection, this is used for emphasis, is used for exclamation, is used for strong emotions. Another explanation is that came about as the result of language contact, most likely between English and some other East Asian language. Now, John McWhorter hints as much.
All of a sudden, all of these young women are becoming Chinese. Very interesting little trait.
The Asian connection is also touched upon by Adam Alexis.
Some languages like Mandarin or Korean sometimes physically add a syllable to the end of words to indicate the part of speech. And white girls are subconsciously doing the exact same thing, which means they're unintentionally responsible for an entirely new grammatical feature in English.
It should be pointed out also that sentence final particles are an aerial feature across East Asia. Mary Arabal writes that sentence final particles are an aerial feature of the languages of the East Asian mainland. Nick Enfield writes also that a feature of sentential organization in mainland Southeast Asian languages is the use of sentence final particles as a basic mode of distinguishing illocutionary forces at the utterance level. If we were to argue for a Chinese origin or an East Asian origin for the sentence final particle in English, we'd have to find it in languages born of contact between English and Chinese, or English or some other East Asian language. Are there any such languages? There are indeed, especially in former British colonies where the local language is some form of Chinese, such as Hong Kong or Singapore. Let's look at this clip of Singapore English.
You know no Chinese No. Okay, I speak English My friend want to buy this computer because he want to play in Indian Next
Indian net.
Indian Next
Internet, you mean, sir?
How many dollar
How many dollar?
The presence of the sentence final particle in Singapore English has been studied extensively. Anthea Gupta writes that serves to indicate the degree of commitment of the speaker to the utterance and the attitude of the speaker to other contextual features. This is very much like Chauncey Chu's parameter of personal involvement, especially the degree of certainty part. It also resembles Wen-yin Lu's difference in attitude. Gupta also writes that serves to keep the interlocutors in contact, which is very similar to Chauncey Chu's speaker concern. You find the same sentence final in Hong Kong English, like in this clip.
Hello, long time no see. It's me again. Grammar is less important when you speak English, okay?
This type of is believed to describe a kind of mood or attitude, which again resembles Wen-yin Lu's difference in attitude. Now, if the particle comes from Chinese, why do we find it in white girls? Why white and why girls? One possible explanation is that the Chinese American population in the US is tiny. Chinese American women account for less than 1% of the total population, whereas white women account for 30%. You're not going to notice something like that if it's used by less than 1% of the population, but if 30% of the population start using it, people start to notice. We also want to ask, why women? And this can be explained using Lebov's gender paradox. In his book on the social factors of language change, Social linguist William Labov explains that the leaders of linguistic change have always been located as women. And more specifically, the women who lead this change are women who have achieved a respected social and economic position in the local networks. So then, are Chinese American women women who have achieved a respected social and economic position in American society? And the answer, I believe, is yes, when you look at the issue from two perspectives. The first is that Chinese Americans or Asian Americans are often viewed as the model minority. That is, they have achieved high levels of education, they have achieved high levels of economic development and cultural assimilation. So in this sense, they have achieved a respected social and economic position. There is also the consideration of yellow fever, where on many online dating sites, different races have always shown a preference for East Asian women. So East Asian women are viewed as desirable in more ways than one, and for this reason, they are viewed as worthy of emulating. So in this video, we have looked at the functions of the sentence final particle a in both Mandarin and English, and believe that its purpose is to point out a difference in attitude between the speaker and the person that the speaker is addressing. I'm talking about this topic. I look at it this way, but I believe that you may look at it differently, which is why I add that a there. Now this a particle may have spread from Chinese into English sometime in the mid-aughts. But in addition to a, English has other particles that serve the same purpose, such as man, dude, bro, or girl. The functions of a become clear if we go back to the video that we saw at the beginning of this talk. When the guy says, my girlfriend is back, the girl says, 我知道啊. I know, but with the a indicating that you think I don't know, but I already know. A difference in understanding. She then goes on to ask, 你到底知不知道我喜欢你啊? Do you have any idea that I have feelings for you? The purpose of the a here is to say that I don't think you know, but this is the case. This is the situation.
我每天都在找你，你以为我时间多？
你以为我时间多啊? You think I have nothing to do all day? Okay, you may believe that. You think I'm bored, I have nothing better to do, but that is indeed not the case. I have better things to do, but I'm only here because I have feelings for you. That is what the particle a can do in a sentence, whether in English or in Chinese. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'll see you next time.